Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Today we'll start the last part of the head injury chapter, that is intracranial hemorrhage. This is the most important part of this chapter. Intracranial hemorrhage means collection of blood within cranium. So within cranium we have the brain, meninges, cerebrospinal fluid and the potential spaces in between the different layers of meninges. So, in terms of position, the intracranial hemorrhage can be epidural or extradural. Epidural hemorrhage or hematoma means collection of blood outside of dura mater. It can be subdural, that is underneath dura mater, that is between dura and arachnoid. Subarachnoid, that is in between arachnoid and pia mater or beneath arachnoid mater, and intracerebral within the brain matter itself. So these are the different types of intracranial hemorrhages. Before going into that, it's imperative that we have a good understanding of the anatomy of the meninges, how the different layers are present and what are the forensically important relations. So the dura mater, it is formed by two collagenous layers, outer layer and inner. However, the outer layer is firmly attached to the inner surface of the skull. So it is fused with the periosteum. It cannot be separated. So, but the inner layer merges with the arachnoid. So in reality, there is no subdural space because upper layer is fused with peritoneum, lower layer is fused with arachnoid matter. But there's a potential space, that is space can be created. Now dura mater, it forms a fold which is called falx. This falx, it is attached with the peritoneum and tentorium beneath. So, and the cranial venous sinuses, different venous sinuses, they run within these folds of falx and tentorium cerebelli. And different branches of meninges, they also course over and through these folds. Now, dura is penetrated various bridging veins. We have come across the bridging veins as the emissary veins. So, when we were dealing with the anatomy of the scalp. So, this uh, multiple veins and random vessels, they are traveling from the dura matters one layer to another, that is from arachnoid matter to the peritoneum. These vessels are traveling, and the dura matter, it forms some polypoid invaginations within the arachnoid matters. These are known as arachnoid granulations. From these arachnoid granulations, cerebrospinal fluid is secreted. So as you can see in this diagram, this is the upper layer of dura mater which is fused with peritoneum. This is the lower layer of dura mater which is fused with arachnoid. So this is subdural space, this thin white line, this is the subdural space. Then this brown line is the arachnoid matter. In between this arachnoid matter, this white space which is traveled by various vessels is the subarachnoid space. Then this is the pia mater. So these are the different layers. Okay, so and within this dura mater we have the venous sinuses. This is the superior sagittal sinus, different veins are there. So this is the anatomy. Arachnoid matter is a thin vascular meshwork. So it is not a membrane per se, it's a thin vascular meshwork which is intimately fused with the inner layer of dura mater. So here also there is no subdural space as such. However, this fusion is not so much form. So on certain conditions, this membrane is split apart and the space is created. So in a head injury, if there's hemorrhage within the and this junction between arachnoid matter and dura matter, there's a travel by various blood vessels. So due to head injury, if these vessels at this point are ruptured and the hemorrhage forms, so that in expanding hematoma, it separates the dura mater arachnoid matter and creates a subdural space, and it is known as subdural hematoma. Now, as I said, vessels and different connective tissue, they enter the brain within the subarachnoid space. This is also, and the subarachnoid in space beneath arachnoid matter, the subarachnoid space, it is an actual space. This is the actual space which is filled with cerebrospinal fluid. And this weight, it is usually less than a millimeter in a young person, but is can be up to a centimeter in an old person due to cerebral atrophy. In cerebral atrophy, the brain gets smaller, so this subarachnoid space increases. So what happens in older persons? The bridging vessels within the subarachnoid space, they are stretched. If they're stretched, so they are more vulnerable to shearing and rotatory stress. Thus, subarachnoid hemorrhage is more common in older individuals. However, it is seen that though these vessels were traveling through subarachnoid space, they continued into the subdural space also. In many cases, the hemorrhage, it appears as a subdural hemorrhage. So these are the four types of intracranial hemorrhage that I already talked about: extradural, subdural, subarachnoid, and intracerebral. We'll start with. So this is a schematic picture. These are hairs. This is your cranium. This head. Beneath cranium, we have this. This is the dura mater. So above dura mater, this is extradural hemorrhage. Beneath dura mater, this is subdural hemorrhage. Then this theta line is the arachnoid matter. Beneath arachnoid matter, this is subarachnoid hemorrhage. Okay, so now you know their relative dispositions. Extradural hemorrhage, is also known as epidural hemorrhage, they are the same thing. This is the bleeding between the inner surface of the skull and the dura mater. In terms of percentage, this is the least common type of intracranial hemorrhage because the dura is because this is not the actual space, and this is a potential space which needs to be created due to expanded hematoma. Now dura mater is very tightly applied to the cranium at the base of the skull. So other than the posterior fossa where there's a little bit of loosening, this extradural hemorrhage does not occur in the skull floor or base of the skull. Whereas the in the vault there is a potential space, so which is so there extradural hemorrhage is more common in the vault because the dura mater can be separated from the skull by an expanded hematoma. Hematoma is most in extradural hemorrhage, it's more commonly arterial in origin, it's arterial bleeding. In rare cases it can be venous bleeding also. And extradural hemorrhage is almost always associated with head injury. So almost 80%, 80 to 85% cases, extradural hemorrhage is associated with skull fractures. Now, extradural hemorrhage is the source of the bleeding. It is usually a branch of middle meningeal artery. The posterior branch is most commonly affected. Anterior branch is a rare source of bleeding. Okay, ethmoidal artery is sometimes be involved, and rare cases, some dural venous sinuses can be the source of the bleeding. Okay, so these some external hemorrhage. So it is caused by a rupture in the branch of the middle pharyngeal artery. Posterior branch is most commonly involved. Anterior branch is rarely involved. Ethmoidal artery can be a culprit also. Dural venous sinuses are the rare cause. So if you see this is a skull, if there's a fracture line like this, there's it can tear a meningeal artery, which can cause expanding hematoma that will strip the dura mater from the inner surface of the skull, thus produces a extradural hematoma. It is common in the mid age of 20 to 40 years. In 90% cases, it's a fissure fracture, and this is a rare type of hemorrhage that I said, but it is usually associated with a fracture in the skull, and it is not seen without any history of head injury. Clot, which is usually sharply defined as was in the photograph, it presses the dura inward. So if the dura is pressed inward, the external surface of the cerebral cortex, there can be a concave depression. There can be depression in the external surface of the brain. These it can be a oval or circular shaped hematoma, and it is the size is usually 30 it's the size is usually few centimeters in diameters, and normal weight usually 30 to 300 grams. 100 gram of epidural hemorrhage is fatal because it is in sufficient amount that can produce a hematoma bigger, which can press the brain to a degree where the midline of the brain shifts due to the pressure effect, and that can lead to a whole lot of other problems, right? Increased intracranial pressure, cerebral edema, etc., which can eventually lead to a coma and subsequent death. So 100 milliliter of extradural hematoma is considered to be fatal one. Now, extradural hemorrhage is usually associated with a feature which is called lucid interval. A lucid interval typically represents as a person suffers a head injury or head trauma. He loses his consciousness for a few moments, so he is rushed to a hospital. But on the way or after reaching the hospital, he regains his consciousness and behaves normally as if nothing has happened, only a mild headache. He is well oriented with the time, place, and person surroundings. He is cooperating. He is speaking normally without any abnormality. The memory is intact. So he is often discharged from the hospital after giving a first aid, and nobody suspects anything. But after reaching home, he can again lose consciousness, and this time this is a consciousness that he may not wake up again. So then it often happens that when he is brought back to the hospital a second time, he is declared broad dead. So this type of presentation, this is called lucid or latent interval. There may be a recovery from the initial phase of contraction that we have gone through. It's a mild contraction, so there's no much of disorientation or loss of memory, but he retained consciousness for but only to lose it again later when it is a fatal one. How does it happen? Because initially the expanding hemorrhage, it was usually thought that the earlier views were lucid interval was caused due to as the hematoma is slowly expanding. Initially it was only a few ml, so it was not a sufficient amount to cause any pressure effect or mass effect on the brain. So the person retained consciousness, but the hematoma is undergoing. So so when it become a larger one, it causes the pressure effect to it causes other complications, and then the person succumbs again. That was the earlier explanation. But the recent its explanations are that epidural hematoma being an arterial one, the formation of hematoma is fairly quick. So within 30 minutes to 1 hour, 100 ml of hematoma can be formed. So in that case also, however, the generation of the sequelae, that is raised intracranial pressure or cerebral edema or diffuse neuronal injury, their development and manifestations take some time. During that period, the person can regain consciousness, but but by that time, these complications they become established. He again loses consciousness and slips into coma. So this is how lucid interval is seen. In the same photograph again, this is the extradural hemorrhage between the dura mater and skull. Nothing to say. By this time, I hope everybody can understand what is a extradural hemorrhage. Extradural hemorrhage looks like this shiny white membrane is the dura mater. The skull is cut open and the scalp is reflected outwards. And as soon as scalp is reflected over the dura mater, there is a circumscribed oval shaped hematoma. Its diameter is usual. Its diameter can be 10 centimeter or more. It looks like blackish red in color, shiny, soft and friable. This R means right side. That's right-sided hematoma. So if the person didn't recovers, there can be left-sided hemiparesis. That is uh, movement from the left hand and left leg. Ipsilateral means same side. Ipsilateral dilatation of the pupil not reacted to light. This is called anisotroria. Anisotroria means one eye is not reacting to light, another one is reacting. That is anisotroria. And if bilateral, in bilateral epidural hemorrhage, there will be both pupils are dilated and there will be both sided hemiparesis, that is decerebrate rigidity. The cerebral cortex is physiologically cut off from the nervous system. You have gone through decerebrate and decorticate rigidity in physiology classes. In bilateral epidural hematoma, there both pupils will be dilated and decerebrate rigidity is seen. In the case of epidural hematoma, death is due to the cerebral edema or secondary hemorrhage in the pons. Tentorial herniation means the increased intracranial pressure, the cerebellum and the brainstem it is pushed downwards. It's called tentorium herniation. So when they're pushed downwards, the vital centers in the medulla, respiratory centers, etc., they are impacted on the rim of the foramen magnum that can lead to death or respiratory failure due to the same. In the autopsy finding, there may be a scalp hematoma. Beneath that, there can be a fissure fracture or any type of fracture. Beneath that, when the skull is open, you will see the hematoma over the dura mater. Different medullary considerations of extradural hemorrhage are: it is usually traumatic in origin, and it's almost always a coup injury. That means the extradural hemorrhage is formed at the site of the application of force. At the direct site of the application of the force, extradural hemorrhage is formed. If there's bilateral extradural hemorrhage, that means the force has been applied on both the sides. A, doc- a doctor must be aware of the lucid interval because he can mistakenly discharge the patient from the hospital during the period of lucid interval. but eventually the patient can lose consciousness again and he can be brought to hospital again, where and it can be fatal. So at that point of time, the doctor can be sued for negligence patient by the patient's relative, or ruin dereliction of duty. That is negligence in the part of the doctor. So in any type of head injury, the patient must be kept in observation for a minimum period of 24 hours, and that can be and should be two CT scan done, one at the time of admission and another one before discharge, to compare that there's no expanding or developing hematoma. The different differential diagnoses are extradural hemorrhage, can be or a subdural hemorrhage or a cerebral fat embolism. As I said, extradural hemorrhage is usually less common in percentage of occurrence. Subdural hemorrhage is much more common but extradural, but most common intrathecal hemorrhage is subarachnoid hemorrhage. Okay. Uh, However, subdural hemorrhage is not almost always associated with skull fracture like extradural hemorrhage. So if the question is what is the most common traumatic intracranial hemorrhage or hemorrhage associated with skull fracture, the answer will be extradural hemorrhage. But taking all causes of all variety are included, all over the most common intracranial hemorrhage is subarachnoid hemorrhage. Okay. Uh, Subdural hemorrhage can be acute, subacute, and chronic. Acute subdural hemorrhage develops right at the time of application of force. Subacute or chronic subdural hemorrhage, they take some time to develop. Subdural hemorrhage can occur at any stage, but it is most common at the extremes of life, that is at the young age and the older age. At the young age, subdural hemorrhage is associated with various forms of fatal child abuse, and in old people, they are usually a chronic subdural hemorrhage is seen, and they are usually mistaken from minute stroke or senile dementia because there's no headache in a chronic subdural hemorrhage, but the presentations are gradual loss of memory after some time. So they are mistaken with senile dementia. Hemorrhage also, they are traumatic in nature, but as it happens in older individuals, or the vessels are usually fragile, the vessels are fragile, and also their cerebral atrophy, so the vessels are stretched between brain and dura mater. So due to even a trivial trauma, most trivial trauma, that they are unlikely to remember by the patient when given history, these vessels can rupture, which can lead to subdural hemorrhage. Okay, so and even this, they are as that due to small vessels, and there's a possibility of having atherosclerosis. The vessels are almost already blocked, so the resulting hemorrhage is a minute amount, a few milliliter, which is insufficient to give rise to any neurological or clinical symptoms. So it usually presents that with a transient headache that occurs with trivial knock. But over but over period when the minute such bleedings occur, that can lead to a development of chronic subdural hematoma. The clinically apparent subdural hematoma are usually 30 to 35 to 100 ml in amount. More than 100 ml, it's fatal. The causes are rupture of bridging or communicating veins, or rupture of inferior cerebral vein, or a dural venous sinus, can be of cortical veins also. So if you can notice the difference is that in the extradural hemorrhage, I said that the source of the bleeding was branches of a middle meningeal artery. But here I am saying all these are veins. So that's the point of difference. Extradural hemorrhage is always arterial in origin, rarely venous. Subdural hemorrhage is usually venous in origin. Uh, it can be associated with laceration or contusion of the brain and dura mater. But subdural hemorrhage, contrary to extradural hemorrhage, can be associated or secondary to some disease like cerebral neoplasm or aneurysm or a blood disorder, or presence of blood disorder means the coagulation disorder, or can be associated with anticoagulants like diplomaral, warfarin, heparin, etc. So they can occur with relatively slight trauma. So there can not be any skull fractures per se. They can be associated with contratube lesions also. That is, there can be epidural hematoma on left side, but the subdural hematoma on the right side. So we know that epidural hematoma is always a coup injury. That means the force was applied on the left side, and subdural hematoma developed as a contratube lesion on the opposite side. It can occur in fights or fall. It is seen in alcoholics due to why? Because alcoholics, they often lose their balance and fall number of times, and with each fall there's a minute amount of subdural hemorrhage, and with time they gradually coalesce and become a bigger hematoma when it becomes clinically apparent. Boxers, when in a boxing ring, they often suffer head trauma due to punches in the head. So after with each punch, a small vessel ruptures, a minute amount of subdural hematoma occurs. But with course of time, it can grow into a chronic subdural hematoma. So the person is a confused, can present as a confused and disoriented state, loss of memory, loss of balance while walking. So this is a like a alcoholic or drunk person. So this is called punch drunk syndrome. Punch drunk syndrome is due to development of chronic subdural hematoma. In boxers, it occurs after long period of receiving continued punches in the head and with numerous minute subdural hematoma, which gradually develop into chronic subdural hematoma. 100 to 150 ml is fatal, and due in a head injury case, when the subdural hematoma develops rapidly, it will cause compression of the brainstem and secondary hemorrhage. Subdural hematoma can be unilateral or bilateral. When it enlarges, it causes displacement of the midline or shift the midline. So the cerebral hemisphere are pushed to the opposite sides, or it can lead to flattening of the convolutions of the opposite hemisphere as that side is pressed against the opposite side of skull. So if there's a right-sided subdural hematoma, it is most likely to compress on. So the left side of cerebral cortex, there will be flattening. Whereas in extradural hematoma, same side same side cerebral cortex, ipsilateral cerebral cortex will show flattening just beneath the hematoma, because it is in extradural hematoma, the hematoma is expanding outside of dura mater. Dura mater is a tough membrane, so dura mater will be pressed upon the cerebral cortex, and there will be some degree of flattening. But in subdural hematoma, it is developed beneath dura mater. So the hematoma itself is pressing on the brain. But hematoma is a softer substance. So there will not be flattening on that side. But due to midline shift, the opposite side cerebral cortex is pushed against the skull. So on opposite side cerebral cortex, there will be contact flattening. So this is when the skull is removed. You can see this is the shiny dura matter, and this black spot, this is the subdural hemorrhage beneath the dura matter. We have not removed the dura matter yet, so it is a semi-transparent membrane. So you can see the subdural hemorrhage from outside of a intact dura matter. Now dura matter is removed. This is the subdural hemorrhage or acute subdural hematoma. Okay. This is how the CT scan will look. Subdural hematoma is expanding. It has caused the midline shift. So the sulci they are not visible due to ensuing cerebral edema. Now, as you can see here, the shape is a sickle shape, or a crescent shape. So epidural hematoma in CT scan appears as a lentiform hemorrhage. Lentiform hematoma. Subdural hemorrhage is present as a crescent-shaped hematoma. Side by side, crescent-shaped, so it is subdural, lentiform or lenticular, so it's epidural. In acute subdural hematoma, the presentation can mimic extradural as the hematoma is expanding rapidly. Sign symptoms they appear more rapid. There can be a lucid interval. Acute subdural hematoma is almost always traumatic. There is no cerebral compression, doesn't develop so rapid, but the secondary changes can occur. Death will be due to the secondary pressure upon the brainstem. As the hematoma is rapidly expanding, the brainstem is pushed downwards, so pressure develop that will lead to respiratory center failure, so death. So the subdural hematoma, if it increases rapidly, so just beneath the subdural hematoma, due to pressure, there will be loss of blood supply. So there will be an infarction may develop. This infarction will be just beneath the subdural hematoma and will be a recent onset. Whereas in an infarction due to a cerebrovascular accident or a cerebral infarction, there this will be old. So in a spontaneous hematoma also, there a person has suffered a stroke. There has been a cerebral hemorrhage. So the cerebral hemorrhage and cerebral infarction, they will develop simultaneously. But in a head trauma, when infarction is due to the intracranial hemorrhage or subdural hematoma will occur, it will develop, hematoma will form, it will cause a pressure effect, then infarction will develop. So infarction will be a recent origin or a fresh origin. So this recent infarction or an old infarction, it can be distinguished from the CT scan by an experienced radiologist. Subacute subdural hematoma due to bleeding from the smaller bridging veins. So the hematoma takes time to develop, few days. The blood here the in subdural hematoma, the hematoma itself will be a thin or fluidy type because partial hemolysis of the blood clot itself. Chronic subdural hematoma, it presents 3 to 6 weeks after the injury. It is seen over usually the parietal lobe can be bilateral or all temporal or frontal lobe also. It can be localized or widespread. It can be mistaken as a senile dementia, and it is the cause of punch drunk syndrome. Now you will deal with subarachnoid hemorrhage. So this is the circle of Willis, as we have all know. The circle of Willis in the middle cerebral branch, the middle cerebral arteries, they can present with a aneurysm, which is known as Berry aneurysm. Due to this rupture of Berry aneurysm is one of the classical celebrated cause of subarachnoid hemorrhage. It is often seen in uncontrolled hypertension or any or a cerebrovascular accident. This is how a cerebral aneurysm ruptures, and that will lead to a subarachnoid hemorrhage. So it can be spontaneous, mainly in cases of hypertension. So in a hypertensive individual, spontaneous subarachnoid hemorrhage can present. In it can be due to rupture of a microaneurysms, which are called Charcot Bouchard aneurysm, and this is seen in older individuals, because in older individuals the vessels are fragile, they are arterial, they are atherosclerosis, so formation of aneurysms are more frequent. Major signs are putamen or internal capsules in 55% of cases. The other sites are lobar white matter, inside the white matter of right or left lobe, thalamus, pons, cerebral cortex, etc. 50% of spontaneous hypertensive subarachnoid hemorrhage is due to rupture of aneurysms. Many aneurysms, they are found at the bifurcation of the middle cerebral artery 90% of cases. Rarely it can be found on anterior cerebral artery or posterior common arteries. In acute alcoholic traumatic subarachnoid hemorrhage is more common because there's loss of muscular coordination. So while falling, the head will be rotated. There's a rotational force. So the vessels ruptures and form a subarachnoid hemorrhage. Most common form of traumatic intracranial hemorrhage is subarachnoid hemorrhage in absolute numbers. Can be unilateral or bilateral, localized or diffuse. Our sites are usually frontal, parietal, or anterior one-third of temporal, rarely seen in occipital area. And when it occurs, the headache is so much. This is the worst headache felt by the man, and it is traditionally described as the thunderclap headache, or it is the worst. Usually, the patient will not say like thunderclap. The patient will say that I have never ever felt this much headache in my entire life. That is the traditional description of subarachnoid hemorrhage given by the person. So headache with rapid onset, maybe a thunderclap type. Stiff neck due to irritation of the meninges. As subdural hematoma develops, the ensuing blood, it irritates the meninges. So that means there will be a meningitis. So due to meningitis, there will be stiff neck. This is called Carnot sign. Or photophobia will be there. The person, the optic nerves, they are irritated by the blood. So there will be photophobia or deterioration of the consciousness. During autopsy, the subarachnoid hemorrhage can be produced as an artifact. Due to that means there was no subarachnoid hemorrhage before, but during autopsy, during dissection of the brain, some bleeding has occurred, which is misdiagnosed by the autopsy surgeon as a subarachnoid hemorrhage. It can be produced during autopsy due to damage of the cerebral brain or the arachnoid matter, or there can be decomposition and and hemolysis. So autopsy subdural, in autopsy it's a challenge to differentiate between subdural hematoma and subarachnoid hematoma, because as I said earlier, the arachnoid membrane is a vascular meshwork, so it is not a separate, this is not a thick shiny membrane like dura matter. So this arachnoid matter is intimately adhered with the brain surface. It dips into the sulcuses and it then goes up. So on naked eye observation, you cannot identify arachnoid matter. So it's difficult to distinguish between subdural and subarachnoid. There are 2 points of difference. Number one, subdural hematoma is above arachnoid matter. Subarachnoid hematoma is beneath arachnoid matter. Arachnoid matter is intact. So, with washing of water, with washing by water, the subdural hematoma can be washed off, but subarachnoid hematoma cannot, because it is beneath arachnoid matter. So, it is protected by arachnoid matter. So it does not wash off. And number two, you cut the brain by sagittal section on the middle and look at the sulcuses. The, as I said, the arachnoid matter dips into the sulcus, and subarachnoid hemorrhage is beneath arachnoid matter. So if there's blood within the sulcus, that means it is subarachnoid hemorrhage. Subdural hematoma does not dip into the sulcus. It is above. It is over the surfaces, over the crest only. But if you see hematoma in the sulcus even, that means it is subarachnoid hemorrhage. So these are the two methods by which by naked eye observation you can distinguish between subdural and subarachnoid hemorrhage at autopsy. It can be mild or serious. In a mild subarachnoid hemorrhage, there can be hemorrhage in a splash manner over the contusion. However, in a diffuse subarachnoid hemorrhage, there is usually no scarring, that is, no flattening of the brain surface or the cisterns as it is seen with the subdural or epidural hemorrhage. This is how a subarachnoid hemorrhage looks like. This glossy feeling is due to the intact subarachnoid hemorrhage. Okay, this is intact subarachnoid membrane. This is the subarachnoid membrane, whitish membrane. And in between the sulci, you will see there's hemorrhage. There's blood. This is subarachnoid hemorrhage or hematoma. Okay. This is subarachnoid hemorrhage. As you see, this is going into the sulci. This. Okay. Look at the season very carefully. This is a crescent-shaped hematoma, subdural, lenticular, epidural, and here there's a small hypertensive. This is subarachnoid. Now, last but not the least, intracerebral hemorrhage. Intracerebral hemorrhage is due to rupture to the capillary and capillary hemorrhage within the brain mat. Due it can be associated with anorexia or sinus thrombosis or blood distress, fat embolism, asphyxia, etc. In different asphyxial death or deaths also, intracerebral hemorrhage can be seen. And this can be spontaneous also in the basal ganglia due to rupture of the lenticulostriate artery. It is common in a middle-aged individual and elderly individuals who have a history of hypertension, but they are not taking regular medications. So, a middle-aged or elderly hypertensive individual who has poor compliance to meditation can present with intracerebral hemorrhage. Spontaneous intracerebral hemorrhage, the most common site is basal ganglia. Most common cause is rupture of lenticulostriate artery. Okay, and the other causes are these: asphyxia, thrombosis, blood dystress, fat embolism, etc. Cause is CVA or cerebrovascular accident, and arterial thrombus. There will be bad pressure and smaller capillaries will rupture. Angioma or malignant tumor, hypertensive disease, laceration of brain, a blow to the head with rupture of skull, poop and contractile mechanism. On the contractile area, there can be intracerebral hemorrhage. Or now, along with intracerebral hemorrhage, intraventricular hemorrhage is also sometimes seen. Intraventricular hemorrhage means there is accumulation or collection of blood within the lateral ventricles or third ventricles or fourth ventricles. It can be traumatic and non-traumatic. In traumatic cause, there will be a blow to the head or head is struck with a heavy object, and that has led to rupture of some vessels and bleeding into the ventricle. The usual source of bleeding is choroid plexus. However, in non-traumatic cases, a non-traumatic intracerebral hemorrhage due to hypertension or CVA can extend into the ventricle, and it is usually fatal if not treated or removed. How an intracerebral hemorrhage looks like: this is your lateral ventricles. The ventricle, these are empty, there's no blood there yet. This is intracerebral hemorrhage in this area. If this hematoma extend that way, there will be blood inside the ventricles also, and then it will be intracerebral and intraventricular hemorrhage, both will be present at that point. Okay. As hematoma, as the fresh blood, as it clots, it becomes solid. So a older hematoma will be white in color, bright white in color. So as you can say, this is a developing intracerebral hemorrhage. Here it's a small, it has bigger. This is the same person. Okay, here you can see the midline has not shifted. Here the midline has shifted. This ventricle has been pushed to the opposite side, so mass effect has developed due to expansion of the hematoma. Thank you very much. This has been a very important part of the chapter. With this, I will conclude the chapter of head injury over a period of 1 week. I have divided the chapter into 3 parts, and this is the most important part to understand the different type of intracranial hemorrhage, how they're formed, what is the source of their bleeding, the cause of the bleeding. It is can be traumatic or non-traumatic. In extradural hemorrhage and the most, it is almost always traumatic. It is arterial in nature. Subdural hemorrhage can be traumatic or non-traumatic. It is usually venous in nature. Saberhatt hemorrhage can be traumatic, can be non-traumatic, can be arterial or venous, both. Interceptor also the same thing. Now you can now if you can go through each of the individual hemorrhage, then you can yourself form into a table which is which will show the mutual differences and similarities between all the four types of hemorrhage, and that table will serve you as the flashcard for last minute revision of the hemorrhage before exam. So I will urge you that please go through the entire video, read about the each of the four types of hemorrhages from the book, and make a bit table showing the similarity and dissimilarities of these four type of hemorrhage. Keep it handy and use it as a flashcard to revise the chapter before your exam. So with that note, I will sign off. Thank you very much for your time and patience. And if you have any doubt, please feel free to reach to me. Drop your queries in the comment section and I will try to address them to the best of my abilities. And if you have liked the video, please press the like button and subscribe my channel. Thank you very much. Adios amigos.